All right. Now, we've seen guys come from the CFL. We've seen guys come from Canada and have successful careers in the NFL. So, Emery, I will start with you. Is there anyone you could see coming from Canada down to the NFL in 2024?
There's a good bit, and here's the thing: I've gone to the first All Star game out the gate every year, and that is the U Sports East West Bowl. The U Sports is the NCAA of Canada, so U Sports is their governing body. They play their All Star game before the season because it makes sense because you're not doing anything in November, post November up there in Canada. So right after, I want to say second week of May, I'm always in Canada because they move it every 2 years to a different spot. Last year it was in Hamilton, so this year it may be in Hamilton again. So I'll be back up there scouting there. It's set up like a regular All Star game week. We have 3 or 4 practices, walk through, then a game on Saturday. So this is the first All-Star game to get the clock started on the upcoming draft. So when I was up there 2 years ago, I saw Theo Benedict of University of British Columbia. Went up there last year. He was up there. Went down to the East West Shrine Bowl, and he was there. That's what I was like, man. At the College Gridiron Showcase this year, I'm looking at the kid. I'm like, you know, man, this UBC kid is pretty doggone good. Then I was like, I kind of feel like I've seen him before. Then I was like, oh yeah, that's right. That was last year at the Shrine Bowl. So it's kind of like cheating, where you went through the whole draft process, and Canada is unique in that way. You can go through the whole draft process, go through the preseason, and then decide to go back to school. So he was able to get through a training camp and say, okay, I want to go back to UBC. So he went through the pre-draft process last year. So I wasn't shocked that he was out there dominating college guys this year because basically was a pro already. But he is awesome, man. He has good footwork, good technique, good core strength. And he was showing last year at the Shrine Bowl and also this season at the Gridiron Showcase that the jump from the U Sports to the NCAA isn't a lot. Because we know up in Canada they play defensively, they play a yard off the ball. So you have that gap that you have time to really get adjusted. So when you're playing in the States, things happen a lot quicker because they're right there on the ball. So you got to get used to not only the speed, the explosiveness, the consistency of the athleticism that you see down and down out. And he was able to make that adjustment. Usually you see these Canadian dudes struggle on day one of an all-star game event because they're trying to get acclimated to the different, dimensions of the game. And then as the week goes on, they just get better and better and better. And that's what I saw about Benedict and also Patrick Lavoie of Carleton. Now, this is a program that does a good job in developing offensive linemen, as does UBC. In Alberta, I'm surprised didn't have one this year. Usually they have a guy that's coming out as well. And Laval, that's the Alabama of the U Sports up there in Canada. So, but Lavoie was someone that stood out this year at the U Sports East West Bowl. I was like, wow, he's got good footwork, good hand usage. He was able to sit down versus a bull rush. And this was someone that was like, okay, then I saw him down at the FCS Bowl, watching him get used to that talent down and down out. He had one of the better weeks, in my opinion.
Now, let me ask you this. When you have guys coming down from Canada, I know you mentioned that it looked like obviously there's a little bit of adjustment because of the guys playing 1 yard off the ball. Do you think either of these guys could come in and start for an NFL team right now? Or do you think they're more raw and could kind of work their way toward that?
They can work their way toward that because where I see the difference between the NCAA and the U Sports and the Canadian athlete and the athlete here in the States is they start a little bit later in terms of playing football, and the strength and conditioning is different down here than it is up there. They're starting to get up to speed because I remember when the first U Sports game I went to was in maybe like 2012. Um, and my homeboy had called me and I was like, he was like, oh, what is it like up there? I said, bro, honestly, I think Ball State will beat the brakes off one of these. Like, what I'm saying? Just a random FBS team. And it was like, I was like, bro, it just feels different. But every year since then, it's just been better and better and better, especially at receiver, especially along the offensive line. There's been a couple of times within the last 6 years, the Giants have brought in a U Sports offensive lineman. I remember they brought in Samuel Tomlinson, who was like 6'7", 350, out of Laval. played well during the camps or whatnot that went back up to Canada. We've seen Carter O'Donnell, hang on with the Colts. We've seen Mark Cordy come down, play well for the Indianapolis Colts. Now he's starting up there for the Edmonton Elks. So it's gotten better, significantly better, to where you're starting to see now Canadian prospects getting pushed into the NCAA. So they're starting to, like a guy that I'll mention here, Michael Chris Ike, running back for Delaware State, was a highly touted recruit in Canada, but Delaware State went up there, grabbed him down, brought him in, and he developed into a fullback for the Hornets. He's 6'2", 225, but at the CFL combine, he ran one of the smoothest 4.52s you ever find. So now you got guys that are getting physically fit up there, getting ready to go, and you're starting to see the college coaches at the NCAA level go up there and pluck out talent, because you see Canadian prospects littered all across the NCAA.
It's crazy to think that we could soon have a Canadian pipeline into American football, because obviously, I think most football fans just associate Canada with the CFL, but, clearly these guys can play, as you just mentioned. All right, Josh, who do you have? Who are your Canadians?
Well, first of all, it's asinine that Emory would talk about an offensive tackle at the University of British Columbia, because what are the odds that an offensive tackle is going to make that transition? Not as good as it would be if two made that transition, because left tackle Giovanni Manu from British Columbia is somebody that the NFL is very aware of as well. He's got a couple of 30 visits, 6'7", 353 pounds. As Emory mentioned, the game is a little bit different there. So there's going to be some technical refinement that has to happen with each of these players. They've gotten a little bit of a jump on it the past couple of years, having gone down to the Shrine Bowl and competed. But Manu ran a 4.96 in the 40-yard dash. He had a 33.5-inch vertical jump. So both really great numbers for an offensive lineman, especially going north of 350 pounds. But again, it's going to take a little bit of an adjustment to make that transition to the next level. So I think it's more likely that you see those players probably get into a practice squad where they can learn and compete on a daily basis before they're thrust into a really, prime role position. But that's why NFL teams are bringing these guys in for visits, so they can start building a relationship with them and possibly be able to sign them once the draft is over. There's a chance they could get into the draft. But I think a lot of teams are looking at these guys as developmental players that still have their best football ahead of them. Then there's also cornerback Quantez Stiggers. He's got good size. He's 5'11", 196, played for the Toronto Argonauts. He was at the Shrine Bowl as well, so Eric Galko has talked about him quite a bit. This is a guy that has good spatial awareness. He's made plays for that team. I think what's interesting is something that Emory touched on earlier, which is the fact that you're playing a little bit off the line of scrimmage. So these guys are getting a running head start. You've got to be able to make that adjustment at that level. But once you make the transition to the NFL, it's a little bit easier in that regard because the other guy doesn't have a head start. But at the same time, he doesn't really have that exposure to landing jams at the line of scrimmage. So he's going to have to work on that with his press man coverage. But this is a guy that I think is really comfortable in zone coverage, has to work on his tackling technique a little bit, but somebody that NFL teams are monitoring on day 3 of this draft class, and somebody that I think fans might see come off the board before Saturday is over.
I want to say this too about he has a unique background because he didn't play college ball.
Right.
He was getting ready to go to college, had a family emergency, went to work, played in a fan-controlled football league, went to an Argonauts tryout, and worked out there and got signed, and ended up winning Rookie of the Year this past CFL season. So you're dealing with a big ball of clay in that regard. And you're right about playing. I always tell people this when they ask the difference between defense in the CFL and defense in the league. Like, imagine, because the field is wider. So imagine someone dropping you off in a Walmart parking lot and telling you, hey man, you got from the door to the end of the parking lot. That's how, when you talk about playing zone, man, it's like you're playing in literally space. So you gotta be able to anticipate, you gotta be able to be quick. So it's fascinating to see. That's why I feel like, and this didn't get talked about enough with Kurt Warner, coming from the Arena League to playing in the NFL, because you're playing inside a damn classroom. It's like, okay, I gotta be accurate. The ball has to get out quick. The placement has to be where it needs to be. So when you get a little bit more space, but you're still operating like you're in a classroom, you're gonna be like all on point. So I always am fascinated with the defensive backs that go from playing out in wide open prairies to coming in a more confined 53 in the third. You're like, wow, I really can maximize the space I have because I'm used to playing in so much room. I can do a lot better. So it's gonna be fascinating to watch his progress, moving forward.
Yeah, and it's
So
crazy.
he grew up in the United States before making that transition, and then
Right.
COVID happened, so that was kind of thrown into the mix there as well. 5'11", 204, ran a 4.46 in the 40-yard dash. So he's got all the traits that you would possibly need to make that transition. Sorry, Breach.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say it's crazy to think that you have a guy who did not play college football who could end up being successful in the NFL. And I think Emery makes a good point, just that if you're a good defensive back in Canada where the field's bigger, then it's like kicking in. It'd be like if the uprights in college or I had the high school uprights where they're wider, except those were the NFL uprights. You kicked on the skinny ones in college, then you go to the wider ones where it should be theoretically easier for you. Yeah, so that's definitely an interesting aspect of this. Do you guys think he gets drafted?
I think so. I think so because he's impressed so much at the Shrine Bowl. Like every day, everyone was locked into what he was doing in one-on-ones. Now, the flip side is he just came off a 20-game season. So, you think about when he's going to hit that wall if he's not at that point already playing 20 professional football games or 18 professional football games because he missed a couple. And now to have to go through the rigors of an NFL season, that could probably push his draft stock down. But I do know teams are kind of upset that they can't just sign him right now, that he has to go through this draft process because they wanted to secure his rights right away. So he may go higher than we think.
Josh, where do you think he goes?
I think you're still probably looking at late day 3 somewhere. So probably that 6th, 7th round range, just because there is somewhat of an unknown with him as far as making that transition. Again, he grew up playing American football. He's had exposure at the Shrine Bowl. So it's not totally new to him the way that we've discussed with a Manu or a Benedette, but somebody that, is definitely going to have to acclimate to the speed of the game a little bit.
All right. We've already talked about small college sleepers. We have talked about Canadian sleepers. After the break, we're going to talk about quarterback sleepers.